pregnant wife attends millionaire husband's wedding. When her child yells, "Mom," the crowd is stunned. They say true love can conquer all obstacles. But what if those obstacles include a secret wedding, a shocking pregnancy, and a missing husband with fortunes at stake? In this tale of deception and heartbreak, Sophia Carter, a lonely yet determined mother-to-be, finds herself face to face with the unimaginable, the lavish wedding ceremony of her millionaire husband, Andrew Hall, to another woman. No one in attendance suspects that the quiet stranger at the back of the opulent hall is already his legal wife. Until, in a moment that halts every whispered conversation and dims every sparkling chandelier, a small child's voice cries out, "Mom!" Sophia Martinez had grown accustomed to life's humbler pleasures. Raised on the outskirts of San Diego, she was the daughter of two hard-working restaurant owners, Carlos and Lucia Martinez. They ran a cozy, family-style eatery where Sophia spent her teenage years waiting tables and perfecting her grandmother's famous mole sauce. She'd been taught that honesty and perseverance were paramount to building a life worth living, virtues that shaped her character. Fate intervened when she met Andrew Hall at a fundraiser gala in downtown San Diego. Andrew was there as a special guest of the local philanthropy group, having recently inherited a substantial portion of his family's fortune, a result of the extensive real estate empire built by his father, Charles Hall. The Halls were originally based in New York, but Andrew spent his college years exploring California, forging new business connections while seeking a life apart from his controlling parents. From the moment Andrew locked eyes with Sophia, it was as if everyone else in the bustling hall ceased to exist. She, unaware of his wealth, found his charm irresistible, and he found her authenticity refreshing. They danced, talked, and laughed until the event ended. Andrew then invited Sophia to dinner at a small local bistro, humble compared to the glitzy restaurants he frequented. The setting suited them, warm, intimate, and far from prying eyes. Over the following months, Andrew immersed himself in Sophia's world, rolling up his sleeves to help at her parents' restaurant, driving her to the local farmers' markets, and sharing in the joys and struggles of small business life. Meanwhile, Sophia got a glimpse of Andrew's life of privileged fancy dinners with prospective business partners, chance encounters with notable CEOs, invitations to exclusive events in Los Angeles and Las Vegas. His last name carried weight, but when Andrew was around her, he seemed content to shed that burden. In Sophia, Andrew discovered a sense of genuine purpose, one he couldn't find among the high society circles he was born into. In him, Sophia found someone who appreciated her simple joys, who didn't mind the sharp tang of dish soap on her hands at the end of a day's work. Their connection was more than physical attraction. It was a bond of two souls trying to find a middle ground where love could flourish, bridging starkly different worlds. Their whirlwind courtship culminated in a spontaneous decision. They eloped in a small chapel near Pacific Beach. With only her childhood friend, Rebecca Johnson, and the chapel's officiant, Father Delgado, as witnesses, Sophia and Andrew promised each other a lifetime of devotion. The hush of the ocean waves, the setting sun painting the sky in pastel hues, and the distant calls of seagulls became the incidental choir to their vows. For Andrew, the decision to marry in secret was propelled by the knowledge that his parents would never approve of a marriage beneath his social class, an archaic notion, but one the Hall family guarded closely. He wanted to protect Sophia from their criticism, from the labyrinth of wealth and reputation politics that made up the Hall empire. He wanted a sanctuary for her, one that was free from the manipulative machinations of those around him. Sophia, too, felt the urgency. With each passing day, the pressure on Andrew to find a suitable match for the family's benefit was mounting. She saw how phone calls from Andrew's mother, Caroline Hall, increased, how the mention of arranged dates and profitable alliances cropped up more frequently. Sophia worried that even their blossoming love might wilt under the scorching light of family scrutiny. They both believed that if they tied the knot quietly, their union would be harder to dissolve once it came to public attention. The day of their elopement felt like a dream. The chapel was modest, draped in white silk ribbons for another wedding that morning. Sophia wore a simple, knee-length ivory dress that clung gently to her curves, a world away from the elaborate ball gown one might expect for a Hall family bride. Andrew wore a crisp navy blazer and slacks, a single white rose pinned to his lapel. After the ceremony, they celebrated with Rebecca and Father Delgado in a nearby taco stand, an unlikely post-nuptial feast, but perfectly emblematic of Sophia's roots. Andrew insisted on ordering one of each item from the menu so Sophia could sample everything. In the background, mariachis serenaded them with a rendition of Bésame Mucho. It was low-key, personal, and profoundly meaningful, a reflection of the path they chose to forge together. They returned home that night, hand in hand, feeling both elated and anxious. Their joy was tinged with the knowledge that, sooner or later, Andrew's family would discover their marriage. And when they did, the real challenges would begin. In the months that followed, Andrew's business life grew more complicated. He became increasingly stressed, juggling his own startup ventures, ranging from eco-friendly real estate developments to tech incubators with the demands of the Hall family's board of directors. The more he tried to stand on his own, the more pressure Caroline Hall applied to bring him back into the family fold. Sophia sensed Andrew's distress. He was often on the phone, whispering in hushed tones during late-night calls, or texting vigorously through dinner. Every time she asked about it, he'd force a smile, reassure her that everything was under control, and promise to share details once the time was right. But time was not on their side. One chilly autumn night, Andrew received an urgent call. Sophia watched as he paced back and forth in their living room, the color draining from his face. He spoke in clipped phrases, eyes darting to her every few seconds, as though he was afraid she might overhear. Once he hung up, he muttered something about needing to travel to New York, family emergency. Undisclosed details, it wouldn't take too long. Sophia tried not to panic. She remembered the hush-hush nature of their marriage, the veiled threats from Andrew's mother about how unfit Sophia was as a Hall bride. Andrew swore he was only going to New York for a week. That was the last night she saw him for what felt like an eternity. Days turned into weeks with no word. Text messages went unanswered. Phone calls went straight to voicemail. Sophia scoured every social media platform, every news site featuring business magnates. Nothing. Andrew had vanished into thin air. She tried contacting Andrew's father, Charles Hall, but the man's brusque secretary insisted. Mr. Hall was unreachable. Caroline Hall's number was similarly guarded. Friend after friend declared they had no knowledge of Andrew's whereabouts or claimed they were sworn to secrecy. Even Andrew's sister Isabel Hall dodged Sophia's calls. Anxiety consumed her days. Her appetite faltered, and nights were spent sleepless on their couch, phone clutched in her hand in hopes he'd call. Loneliness seeped into her thoughts, breeding doubt and fear. Could Andrew have abandoned her? Was the family forcibly keeping him away? Did something worse happen? Finally, one morning, Sophia decided she couldn't wait any longer. She booked a flight to New York. If Andrew wouldn't return home or answer her calls, she'd find him herself. Little did she know that her journey would reveal truths more devastating than she could ever imagine. New York City's winter air greeted Sophia with a chill that stung her cheeks. She clutched her coat tighter, determined not to let the freezing gusts weaken her resolve. Armed with the address of the Hall family's Manhattan penthouse, she navigated the bustling sidewalks until she stood before a gleaming skyscraper on Fifth Avenue. Upon entering the luxurious lobby, she approached the front desk. The doorman, clad in a well-pressed uniform, regarded her skeptically when she mentioned she was there to see Andrew Hall. After several minutes of terse phone calls and disapproving glances, the doorman finally escorted her to an elevator that soared to the top floor. Stepping out onto the private foyer, Sophia felt her heart pound. The door swung open to reveal Caroline Hall herself. Regal and poised, Caroline looked as though she had just walked off a runway in her tailored black suit and perfectly coiffed silver hair. The cold blue eyes appraised Sophia from head to toe. "May I help you?" Caroline asked, her tone implying that Sophia's presence was highly unwelcome. "I'm here to see Andrew," Sophia replied, voice trembling with a mix of fear and desperation. Caroline's lips curved into a frosty smile. "Andrew is preoccupied with family matters. Why don't you return home and let him deal with them? I'm his wife." The declaration hung in the air like a bombshell. Caroline's smug expression froze momentarily before she let out a derisive chuckle. "You're mistaken if you think a little ceremony on a beach could bind Andrew to you," she said icily. "He's a Hall. He has responsibilities that far exceed whatever arrangement you believe you had with him." Sophia tried to control her mounting panic. "Where is he?" "You have no right to demand anything in this house," Caroline spat. "As for Andrew, he's moved on to bigger and better things. The company needs him, needs a proper Hall. You should have known that from the beginning." The conversation ended abruptly when Caroline's phone buzzed. She stepped away to answer it, leaving Sophia in the silent foyer. Sophia felt tears prick her eyes. Her intuition screamed that something was gravely amiss. But before she could gather herself, Caroline returned, dismissing her with a gesture. "Don't come here again," Caroline warned. "You'll only embarrass yourself. Andrew will contact you if and when he sees fit." With that, the door slammed shut, leaving Sophia in a state of shock. She realized with dread that Andrew's family might have succeeded in tearing them apart, and she was now completely alone in a city that felt as cold as Caroline's glare. Heartbroken and overwhelmed, Sophia stumbled onto the streets of Manhattan. The cacophony of car horns and throngs of people moving purposefully in every direction felt surreal. Everywhere she looked, life went on as if her world hadn't just shattered. She needed answers, but they were locked away behind the Hall family's impenetrable walls. Desperate, she sought out an old acquaintance from a charity event, a junior executive named Marcus Powell, who worked for the Hall family's real estate division. She remembered him as polite and somewhat sympathetic. After a series of frantic calls, she managed to persuade Marcus to meet her at a nearby coffee shop in Midtown. When Marcus arrived, he cast nervous glances around the cafe, as if afraid of being followed. Over a cup of steaming black coffee, he confirmed her worst fears. Andrew was indeed in New York, but he was rarely seen in the public eye. Rumors swirled among company executives that the elder Halls had orchestrated a new business alliance and possibly a new engagement for Andrew to secure a multi-million-dollar merger. There's talk of him marrying Elizabeth Harrington, the daughter of Charles Harrington, who owns a large chain of luxury hotels, Marcus confided in a hushed tone. "Your marriage was never officially recognized among the board members. They think it was some fling." Sophia's heart pounded. "That's impossible. We have a marriage license, a legal ceremony." Marcus shrugged helplessly. "The Halls are powerful, especially Caroline. If she wants something erased, she has the means to do it." Tears blurred Sophia's vision. She felt used, betrayed, but she pressed on. "Does Andrew even know what's happening? Why would he agree to any of this?" Marcus sighed. He's being strong-armed by his parents. They claim the family business is in dire need of a partnership with the Harringtons. Some big project is falling apart. Andrew's not just a pawn, he's also a father's heir, with a duty to protect the Hall name. Maybe they threatened him, maybe they're controlling him, I don't know. Before Sophia could ask more, Marcus glanced at his watch, muttered an apology, and hurried away. His last words offered a sliver of hope. Don't give up on him yet. If Andrew married you, it means he loves you, no matter how the Halls try to spin it. Sophia was left alone with a newfound terror growing inside her. As she took a deep breath, the truth clanged through her mind, louder than the city's ever-present din. She might not only be fighting for her husband, but for her unborn child. Striding through the crowded sidewalks, Sophia pressed a protective hand against her abdomen. Could the stress and anguish of the last few weeks have caused her to miss the obvious signals her body was sending? She thought of the mild bouts of nausea, the unexplainable fatigue, and her sudden aversion to certain foods she once loved. A trembling sense of anticipation coursed through her as she hailed a cab and headed to the nearest pharmacy. Back in her modest hotel room in Queens, she stared at the 2 lines on the pregnancy test. Positive. Her breath caught in her throat. A flurry of emotions, joy, fear, disbelief collided in her chest. She thought about calling Andrew, but the futility of that notion sank like a stone. He was unreachable, yet the knowledge of this new life forming inside her gave her an unexpected surge of resolve. She would not be discarded. She would not allow her child to be erased from the Hall family's narrative. With her new reality burning bright, she booked an appointment at Mount Sinai Hospital. There, a kind-faced physician named Dr. Jonathan Gray confirmed the pregnancy. He offered her pamphlets about prenatal care, and they discussed her immediate next steps. But lurking behind every practical piece of advice was the question she couldn't ignore. Where did Andrew stand in all of this? That night, lying on the stiff hotel bed, Sophia scrolled through old photos on her phone, pictures of her and Andrew cooking dinner at her parents' restaurant. Selfies from the day they eloped, candid shots of Andrew laughing at her father's jokes. She felt heartbreak, yes, but also a steadfast certainty. She wanted to fight for Andrew, for their marriage, and for the baby. Yet, how could she reach him? The whole empire was a fortress, and Caroline was the watchful warden. A random idea surfaced. She could approach one of Andrew's philanthropic partners, someone who might have a direct line to him. She recalled Andrew mentioning a philanthropic gala in Manhattan, an event that Bill Gates himself once attended. The Hall family made frequent appearances at high-profile charity functions, especially those linked to global initiatives. Sophia sensed that if she could get into one such event, she might corner Andrew, if only for a minute, and tell him about the baby. Even if security tossed her out, she'd have tried. And so, with unwavering determination, Sophia embarked on a seemingly impossible quest, infiltrating the upper echelons of New York society to save her marriage and secure her child's future. Sophia had never felt more out of place. As she stood in the cavernous marble lobby of the Madison Grand Hotel, she watched tuxedo-clad gentlemen and elegantly dressed women glide across the polished floors. The hotel bustled with excitement for the upcoming charity auction, a black tie affair, rumored to draw the city's most influential players, including members of the Hall family. Clutching an invitation borrowed from a sympathetic acquaintance, Rebecca Johnson's distant cousin, who couldn't attend, Sophia tried to quell the panic rising in her throat. She wore the most formal dress she could afford, a flowing navy gown from a local boutique in San Diego, and used her mother's vintage pearl necklace to add a touch of sophistication. Upon checking in at the registration table, her heart pounded, worried her borrowed invitation would be flagged. To her immense relief, the staff offered a polite smile, handed her a program, and motioned her inside. Before stepping into the grand ballroom, Sophia caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirrored walls. She took a breath, smoothed a stray hair behind her ear, and steeled herself for whatever awaited. Inside, the room glittered with opulent chandeliers, and the air hummed with idle chatter. Men discussed stock performance and potential mergers, while women sipped champagne and boasted about upcoming vacations to Aspen or Street Barts. Everyone seemed to know everyone, forging an exclusive bubble that was hard to penetrate. Sophia inched her way through clusters of guests, scanning faces in search of Andrew. It wasn't long before she spotted Caroline Hall in a far corner, engaged in conversation with an older man who radiated power. Her heart lurched at the possibility that Andrew might be near, but she saw no sign of him. She lingered by the bar, sipping sparkling water and bracing herself to eavesdrop on conversations that might reveal Andrew's whereabouts. Through snippets of talk mergers, expansions, future alliances, she heard mention of an important announcement the Halls would make that very evening, presumably something monumental for the company. Panic fluttered in her chest. She had to find Andrew before that announcement. Every nerve in her body screamed that the announcement would seal Andrew's fate with another woman, locking away her hopes forever. She could feel protective instinct blooming for the unborn child she carried. She refused to let her child be born into a world that denied its existence. And so, with renewed determination, Sophia dove deeper into the crowd, ready to confront anyone who could lead her to Andrew. Weaving her way through the ballroom, Sophia studied every tuxedo, every gait, every flicker of hair that resembled Andrew's. At times, the crush of bodies made her want to flee, but she stayed focused on her mission. Eventually, her persistence paid off. She spotted Charles Hall, Andrew's father, standing near the raised dais. Tall, with graying temples and a stern demeanor, Charles was speaking with a handful of reporters. A hush fell across the room as the announcer's voice boomed over the speaker system, welcoming everyone and hinting at a special statement from the Hall family. In a swirl of designer gowns and tailored suits, Charles took the mic. His calm, authoritative voice addressed the ongoing philanthropic efforts their company was spearheading, a new housing project in underserved communities, done in collaboration with Harrington Hotels. Applause erupted. Then a second figure stepped onto the dais, Elizabeth Harrington. She was statuesque, with a confident stride, her hair styled in a sleek chignon. As cameras flashed, she offered a practiced smile. Then Charles Hall smiled broadly and declared that their two families, Hall and Harrington, would unite not just in business, but in marriage. Applause again, along with hushed gasps. Elizabeth Harrington stood poised, accepting congratulations as if it were her due. Sophia's chest constricted. She braced herself against a nearby table, her mind spinning. Where was Andrew? Why wasn't he standing there with Elizabeth? Was he even present? She edged closer to the dais, half expecting Andrew to emerge any moment. But the announcement ended and the crowd dispersed into excited whispers. Suddenly, Marcus Powell appeared at her side, his expression filled with alarm. "Sophia, what are you doing here? If Miss S. Hall sees you..." Sophia's voice trembled as she confronted him. "Where is Andrew?" They just announced his engagement to Elizabeth Harrington, without him even being here. Marcus hesitated before nodding to a corridor off to the side. "He's backstage, I think. They're probably keeping him hidden to maintain appearances. Security is tight." Without waiting, Sophia rushed toward the corridor. Two large security guards blocked the entrance. Sophia's adrenaline surged. She fished out a business card from her purse, one that still bore Andrew's name from a past event, and flashed it, stammering that she was Andrew's personal assistant, there on an urgent matter. The guards exchanged skeptical looks, but her trembling sincerity momentarily threw them off. They let her pass, warning her not to linger. Heart hammering, she stepped into the dimly lit corridor, prepared to finally confront Andrew. But nothing could ready her for what she was about to discover. Sophia's footsteps echoed in the quiet backstage area, her pulse thrumming in her ears. She heard voices from around a corner and froze. She recognized Andrew's distinct baritone, laced with an edge of frustration. Taking a deep breath, she inched closer. Andrew stood with Elizabeth Harrington, but their body language spoke volumes. They were locked in a tense conversation. Elizabeth, arms crossed, wore a tight-lipped expression. Andrew ran a hand through his hair, his agitation evident. "I told you I won't go through with it until—" Andrew began, but Elizabeth cut him off. "You don't have a choice. Our families are counting on this, and I won't have you jeopardize it. The press already got wind of the engagement. The official announcement is made. There's no turning back." Her voice was clipped, a far cry from the refined, gracious persona she displayed moments earlier. Before Andrew could respond, Sophia stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Andrew." The color drained from Andrew's face at the sight of her. "Sophia," he whispered, eyes wide with shock and relief. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as husband and wife locked eyes. He took a step toward her, but Elizabeth quickly inserted herself between them. "And who might you be?" Elizabeth demanded, scanning Sophia from head to toe with disdain. Sophia's lip quivered. "I'm his wife." A hush fell. Andrew let out a shuddering exhale, glancing at Sophia's abdomen as though sensing what she carried. Elizabeth's face flashed with confusion, then contempt. She looked at Andrew, waiting for him to refute the claim. Andrew swallowed hard. "Elizabeth, I should have told you this from the start. Sophia is—" Elizabeth held up a manicured hand. "Save it. I've already heard rumors about some secret fling you had in California. Now she's here, playing the devoted wife." Her eyes flicked to Sophia. "Let me guess. You want money. A little hush-hush settlement so you can disappear and let Andrew do his duty." Sophia bristled. "I'm not here for money," she said, voice shaking. "I'm here for my husband. I needed to know why he abandoned me. And now I have more to fight for." She placed a protective hand over her stomach, tears threatening to spill. "I'm pregnant." The weight of her confession suffused the hallway with near palpable tension. Andrew stared, a mixture of shock and joy crossing his features. Elizabeth's expression curdled into anger. In that single moment, everything changed. The father of Sophia's child stood before her, engaged to another woman, while the whole empire hovered in the background, dictating fates. Their reunion was anything but sweet. Silence lingered in the corridor, broken only by the faint sounds of the charity event continuing in the main ballroom. Sophia's chest felt tight as she braced for Andrew's response. Would he refute her, embrace her? Or was he too ensnared by the Hall family's demands? Andrew reached out to touch Sophia's arm gently, but Elizabeth slapped his hand away. "Don't you dare," she hissed. "This is exactly why we had to keep you away from California, because you refused to let go of your past." Sophia's jaw clenched. "He doesn't belong to you. Andrew and I are legally married. And now that I'm pregnant, you have no right to keep him from us." Elizabeth scoffed, turning to Andrew with a dangerous glint in her eye. "Are you going to stand there and let her manipulate you? Did you think you could hide a marriage from me and my father forever?" Andrew's gaze flicked to Sophia, his eyes brimming with regret. "I never wanted this. My mother demanded I return to New York. She threatened to ruin Sophia's life if I didn't come back. I thought I could fix things, secure the family business, protect you from their wrath. But everything spun out of control. When they introduced me to Elizabeth, they said it was just a formality for some joint venture. I never agreed to marry her until they forced my hand." He looked pained as he confessed. They threatened to declare our marriage invalid, to block all my resources. They even threatened your parents' restaurant in San Diego. I felt cornered. Tears pooled in Sophia's eyes. "You should have told me," she whispered. "We could have fought this together." Elizabeth, arms crossed, inhaled sharply. "So you're telling me this entire arrangement was built on lies? That you're not fully committed to the Harrington Hall merger?" Andrew faced her with a resolute calm. "I'm sorry, Elizabeth, but my loyalty is to my wife and our child." In that moment, Elizabeth's facade cracked. Her eyes glistened with anger and possibly even heartbreak. "I've given up everything to make this arrangement. Do you think my father will let you walk away scot-free? Do you think your mother will let this pass? You've destroyed two families' reputations tonight." She stormed off, presumably to report back to Caroline and Charles Hall. Sophia stood speechless, the enormity of the situation hitting her in waves. Andrew gently cupped her face, tears of guilt and relief marking his features. But they both knew that the battle was only just beginning. Despite Andrew's defiance, the Hall family and the Harringtons pushed forward with their public engagement announcement. The media quickly picked up the story of the impending union of two powerful business dynasties. Sophia became an afterthought, a rumor whispered about in private circles. Andrew was heavily restricted by his parents. Security details followed him everywhere, pressuring him to attend events with Elizabeth as proof of their upcoming nuptials. Sophia returned to San Diego, crestfallen yet resolute. She could no longer risk the stress of continuous confrontations for the sake of her baby's health. Still, Andrew found ways to contact her: late-night phone calls, clandestine emails, short text messages. "Always," he insisted, "I'm working on a solution. Just trust me." Months passed in this agonizing limbo. Sophia's pregnancy advanced, and she found comfort in her parents and friend Rebecca Johnson, who offered unwavering emotional support. Still, Andrew's absence weighed on her. The once warm memories of their time together were overshadowed by tabloid headlines proclaiming Hall Harrington wedding of the century. As Sophia's belly grew, so did the public spectacle. Rumor had it the Halls were sparing no expense for the grand wedding, rumored to be held at an exclusive resort in Hawaii. Andrew's messages became more desperate. He promised that once he gained control of certain assets, he would break free, but he never disclosed precisely how. The fewer people who knew his plan, he claimed, the less chance of sabotage from the Harringtons. By the time Sophia entered her third trimester, she had nearly given up on receiving any real rescue from Andrew. That was when she got the call. An old college friend of Andrew's leaked the wedding's location, the Orchid Palms Resort on the Big Island. It was all scheduled for next month. Horrified, Sophia realized Andrew had run out of time to keep his word. Then something remarkable happened. Just weeks before the wedding date, Sophia went into early labor. Sweating and trembling, she was rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital in San Diego. With her parents by her side, she gave birth to a baby boy named Ethan Carter Hall, a testament to both her own lineage and Andrew's name. Holding Ethan in her arms, she wept with a mixture of love and despair. Their child was perfect, a tiny miracle with big hazel eyes, a blend of Sophia's warmth and Andrew's intensity. She was sure that if Andrew knew, he would move heaven and earth to be here. But as day bled into night, she heard nothing from her husband. The wedding date crept closer. Sophia stared at the wedding invitation in disbelief. One arrived at her doorstep, presumably out of twisted courtesy, or perhaps arrogance on Caroline Hall's part. Printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing, it read, "The Hall and Harrington families cordially invite you to the wedding of Andrew Hall and Elizabeth Harrington at the Orchid Palms Resort, Hawaii." The date was just 10 days away. Her baby, Ethan, was only a few weeks old, still so fragile. Yet, as she gazed into his curious eyes, an unshakable resolve took hold. She had to go. If Andrew wouldn't come to see his own son, she would bring their son to him. With support from her parents, who promised to manage the restaurant, and a teary farewell from her best friend Rebecca, Sophia booked a last-minute flight to Hawaii. The cost was staggering, but she channeled her pain and used her savings to secure a room at a budget-friendly motel near the resort. Arriving on the Big Island, she felt a mixture of dread and serenity. The island's lush greenery, fragrant hibiscus, and rolling waves in the distance were in stark contrast to the turmoil she faced. She carefully swaddled Ethan, shielding him from the tropical sun, and headed to the resort. At the Orchid Palms gates, security swarmed, scanning each guest's name against a VIP list. Using the formal invitation, Sophia gained entry, though the suspicious stares of the staff followed her. She kept a low profile, hugging the edges of the resort's manicured gardens. The wedding was scheduled for the next day. Tonight would be the final rehearsal dinner, a private affair. If she could just get close enough to Andrew, show him Ethan, maybe everything would change. She managed to track down the lavish event hall, glowing with lanterns and thronged by well-dressed guests. Waitstaff darted around with silver trays of hors d'oeuvre, and the sweet melody of a string quartet drifted on the balmy night air. Sophia, feeling out of place in her simple sundress, cradled Ethan in her arms, scanning the crowds for her husband. Her heart nearly stopped when she spotted Andrew in a crisp white shirt and linen trousers, greeting guests alongside Elizabeth. From the distance, she could see the tension in his posture, the forced grin on his face. But how could she approach him with everyone watching? She feared one misstep could have security dragging her away. Still, she had to try. Tomorrow would be too late. Sophia hovered behind a cluster of palm trees that lined the perimeter of the open-air event space. She was close enough to observe the forced pleasantries between Andrew and Elizabeth. Occasionally, Elizabeth would lean in with a practiced smile, whispering something that made Andrew's jaw clench. The facade they displayed was picture-perfect for the cameras, but Sophia could see the unspoken turmoil beneath. Ethan stirred in her arms, letting out a soft whimper. Sophia gently soothed him, praying he wouldn't cry. Every fiber of her being urged her to do something, but the presence of security guards stationed near Andrew made it complicated. She had to be strategic. One brazen attempt to cross the lines would get her ejected, or worse, she might lose any chance to see Andrew at all. She was contemplating how to proceed when a figure stepped out from behind another cluster of guests, Marcus Powell. He caught sight of Sophia, his eyes widening. With a quick glance around, he discreetly motioned for her to follow him to a quieter corner of the garden. Once there, he whispered urgently, "You shouldn't be here." "If Caroline or Elizabeth sees you," Sophia's face was etched with desperation, "I have no choice. Andrew needs to know he has a son." Marcus's expression softened. "Look, Andrew tried to tell them. He threatened to call the wedding off, but they threatened a lawsuit that would destroy him financially. They even threatened your parents' livelihood again." He felt trapped, convinced that the wedding had to go forward. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "They can't keep him hostage forever. This is insane." Marcus rubbed his temples. "You're right. But you need a moment alone with him. Leave it to me. I'll create a distraction during the ceremony tomorrow." "It's the best I can do." Sophia hesitated, hugging Ethan closer. "I can't just stand by and watch him say I do to her. He has to know about Ethan before he makes that choice." Marcus looked at the baby, a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. "I'll do what I can." With that, he slipped back into the sea of guests, leaving Sophia with a fragile thread of hope. That night, she returned to her motel room, her stomach in knots. She cradled Ethan to sleep, humming the lullaby her mother once sang to her. Tomorrow, her entire life and the future of her son hung in the balance. She knew the Hall family's power could crush her, but her love for Andrew and Ethan's right to a father gave her the courage to face whatever may come. The morning of the wedding dawned in a breathtaking palette of gold and peach. White satin ribbons fluttered in the ocean breeze, and rows of white chairs lined the resort's manicured lawn, overlooking the azure sea. Guests filed in, clad in designer suits and vibrant dresses that shimmered in the Hawaiian sunshine. Paparazzi lingered at a respectful distance, lenses ready to capture the wedding of the century. Sophia had never felt more out of place. Yet she was there, wearing a simple white sundress under a light shawl. She kept Ethan swaddled against her chest. Standing behind a row of tropical plants, she tried to stay unnoticed while waiting for the ceremony to start. Her plan was uncertain. Would Marcus come through with his promised distraction? Would Andrew see her amid the crowd and call everything off? Or would the wedding proceed, sealing her fate as an outcast? The hush of anticipation fell as the music swelled. Elizabeth Harrington glided down the aisle in a couture gown, each step confident and assured. Andrew waited at the end of the aisle, looking every bit the reluctant groom, though stoic in his tailored suit. Caroline and Charles Hall, along with Charles Harrington, watched from the front row, satisfaction gleaming in their eyes. When Elizabeth reached Andrew, she clasped his hands, her expression a perfect blend of devotion and triumph for the cameras. The officiant began speaking, extolling the virtues of marriage and unity. Sophia's heart pounded so loudly she was sure people nearby could hear it. As the officiant neared the vow exchange, her desperation grew unbearable. Ethan, sensing her tension, stirred and began to fuss. She could feel his tiny limbs twitching against her. Around her, guests were transfixed on the couple, the air thick with anticipation. Andrew's voice trembled as he repeated the officiant's words, but he didn't pull away. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the catering area. A loud crash echoed across the lawn. Waiters rushed about, trays clattering as a tower of champagne glasses toppled. Some guests jumped to their feet. The officiant paused, uncertain. Sophia recognized her cue. Marcus had come through with his distraction. Summoning every ounce of courage, she stepped out from behind the foliage. Clutching Ethan, she made her way down the side of the aisle, her heart pounding like a war drum. She locked eyes with Andrew, just as he was about to slip the ring onto Elizabeth's finger. Time seemed to slow. This was it, the moment that would change everything. Following Andrew's public denouncement of the wedding, chaos erupted. Security struggled to contain paparazzi, who clamored for close-up shots of the family drama. The Harringtons, mortified, stormed off with a swirl of outraged guests trailing behind. Meanwhile, Caroline and Charles Hall confronted Andrew in a secluded corner of the resort's grounds, their anger barely concealed behind forced smiles for the cameras still lingering. Caroline's voice seethed with hostility. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've ruined everything. The merger was our last chance to stabilize the company after the last investment failure. You've destroyed our reputation, Andrew." Andrew cradled Ethan protectively. "You destroyed it yourselves the moment you tried to force me into a loveless marriage and threaten Sophia's family." "I won't be your pawn anymore." Charles stepped forward, leveling a stern glare at Sophia. "This girl, this child, are liabilities we can't afford." Sophia bristled, but before she could speak, Andrew cut in. "Watch your tone, father. Sophia is my wife. Ethan is my son. If you try to harm them, legally or otherwise, I will fight you every step of the way." Caroline's lip curled. "You'll regret this. When the board votes next month, they might remove you entirely. Your trust fund could be frozen, your shares diluted, and don't think for a second that the Harringtons won't sue for breach of contract." Andrew squared his shoulders, a newfound resolve in his voice. "Let them come. I'll face whatever consequences I must, but I won't lose my family." With that, Caroline hurled one final warning. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. I hope you can live with it." She spun on her heel, Charles following in her wake, leaving Andrew and Sophia alone with their infant son. The tension slowly eased from Andrew's frame as he turned to Sophia. "Are you okay?" She nodded, tears brimming. "I'm just so relieved you finally know about Ethan." "I was so scared." Andrew moved closer, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. "I'm sorry it took me this long. Let's get out of here." They left the resort amidst camera flashes and stunned onlookers. They returned to Sophia's modest motel room, far from the opulence of the Orchid Palms. The tension of the evening gave way to a quiet intimacy as Andrew carefully rocked Ethan to sleep, awe and love shining on his face. Despite the looming threats from both families, the three were together at last. Little did they know, their challenges had only just begun. The days following the halted wedding were a whirlwind of legal notices, scandalous headlines, and frenzied speculation in the business world. Tabloids splashed photos of Andrew cradling baby Ethan, labeling Sophia a mystery woman who had upended one of the most prominent society weddings in recent memory. Talk shows debated the authenticity of Sophia's claim, questioning whether she was a gold digger or the rightful Miss S. Hall. Meanwhile, Andrew faced mounting pressure from the Hall board of directors. Their stock took a hit amid the negative publicity, and rumors swirled that the Harringtons would sue for damages related to the failed merger. Andrew's phone buzzed incessantly, with calls from outraged board members and high-profile investors. Yet, for the first time in his life, Andrew felt anchored by his own moral compass. He had found clarity in choosing his family over a forced alliance. Legally, Sophia's marriage license was called into question by the Hall's powerful legal team. Documents suspiciously vanished from California's county records, throwing the legitimacy of the union into dispute. Determined to prove the truth, Sophia enlisted Rebecca Johnson's help. A paralegal by trade, Rebecca had contacts willing to dig through official archives and track down the officiant, Father Delgado, to testify. In an unexpected twist, Elizabeth Harrington made a statement to the press. Rather than appear as the jilted bride, she presented herself as the victim of a con by Andrew and Sophia, claiming that they had orchestrated the entire fiasco to extort the Harrington family. Her father, Charles Harrington, confirmed they were preparing a lawsuit. The Hall family, in damage control mode, remained silent publicly, but behind closed doors, Caroline negotiated with Elizabeth's father, trying to salvage whatever alliance they could in a different capacity. Throughout the storm, Andrew and Sophia found refuge in each other. They decided to leave Hawaii immediately, returning to San Diego, where they stayed with Sophia's parents. The comforting aroma of her parents' restaurant and the quiet support of old friends provided a stark contrast to the media circus swirling around them. Ethan, blissfully unaware, filled their days with sleepless nights, diaper changes, and moments of pure wonder. Each time Andrew looked into his son's eyes, he knew that every sacrifice was worth it. He began to quietly build an alternative plan, securing enough funds from his personal accounts before they could be frozen, seeking new investors for a startup concept he had once shelved, and preparing to stand on his own, separate from the Hall empire if need be. Weeks turned into months. While the legal drama played out in the background, Andrew and Sophia settled into a tentative new life. Despite constant phone calls from Caroline Hall, who alternated between threats and offers of hush money, they refused to buckle. Their primary focus remained on Ethan and stabilizing their family. In a surprising development, the officiant from their elopement, Father Delgado, emerged as a crucial ally. With Rebecca Johnson's help, he provided notarized testimony and an unassailable record of the marriage ceremony. Photographs, witness statements, and a digital backup of the marriage license were found. The evidence was strong enough to force the local clerk's office to restore the records, proving Sophia and Andrew's legal union without a shadow of doubt. This victory ignited a fire in Andrew. With their marriage validated, the Hall family's attempts to paint Sophia as an interloper lost credibility. He reached out to a journalist he trusted, Emily Brooks from the New York Times, who had once interviewed him for a philanthropic piece. Sharing his story candidly, Andrew detailed the pressure from his parents, the forced engagement, and his ultimate decision to choose his wife and son. Emily's resulting article, "The Hall Heir Who Walked Away," shocked high society and elicited both condemnation and admiration from readers nationwide. The Harringtons' lawsuit wavered under the weight of public scrutiny. Allegations that the wedding fiasco was orchestrated by Andrew and Sophia no longer held water. Still, the damage to Harrington hotels was real. Stock fluctuations lost investor confidence, and they blamed Andrew. With the Hall empire reeling as well, both families scrambled to salvage their finances. Amid this turbulence, Andrew unveiled his new startup, an eco-friendly real estate development plan that he had first envisioned during his time in California. Backed by a few loyal partners, he pitched the idea as a venture separate from the Hall conglomerate. Interested investors saw an opportunity to back Andrew independently, especially given the sympathetic press he was receiving. At home, Sophia watched Andrew blossom into a man released from the chains of familial control. While the legal storms hadn't fully subsided, Caroline Hall still had her own ways of manipulation. Andrew remained steadfast. Every night, he returned home to feed Ethan, to share a family dinner around the Martinez kitchen table, and to plan for a future where they could live free from the machinations of high society. In those quiet moments, as Sophia and Andrew gazed down at their sleeping son, they realized that their battle was about more than just preserving a marriage. It was about forging a life on their own terms, free from the toxic legacies of wealth and power that had almost torn them apart. Just when it seemed the dust was finally settling, Caroline Hall arrived unannounced at the Martinez family restaurant. She swept in with her usual air of superiority, causing the lunchtime crowd to gawk at her expensive designer ensemble and diamond-studded sunglasses. Sophia was behind the cash register, feeding Ethan a bottle, when Caroline's frosty voice reverberated through the small space. "I need to speak with my son," Caroline declared, ignoring everyone else. Andrew emerged from the kitchen, a dish towel slung over his shoulder, the scent of fresh tortillas lingering in the air. "Mother," he greeted coolly, "what are you doing here?" Caroline observed her surroundings with thinly veiled contempt. The hum of patrons chatting and the spicy fragrance of homemade sauces was a far cry from her opulent world. "I've come to offer you a final chance," she said. "Drop this charade, rejoin the family, and we'll clean up your mess. We can broker a settlement with the Harringtons that won't bankrupt us all." Sophia tensed, pressing Ethan closer to her. Andrew glanced over, concern flickering in his eyes. "And by rejoin the family, you mean continue to hide my marriage and child, right? Because that's your definition of a cleaned-up mess." Caroline clicked her tongue. "You can remain married if you choose, but we will never acknowledge her publicly. As for the child, I've spoken with legal counsel, and there are ways to handle that financial compensation, ensuring the boy's future without interfering with the company's brand." Sophia's cheeks burned with anger. "He has a name, Ethan, and he's your grandson." Caroline's gaze swept over Sophia dismissively. "If you truly cared for Andrew, you'd encourage him to do what's best for the Hall legacy." Andrew slammed the dish towel onto a nearby counter, causing a hush to fall over the restaurant. "Enough. My legacy is my family, Sophia, Ethan. I'm done with your manipulations." Caroline pursed her lips. "Then you leave me no choice. The board vote is in a week. Your father and I will ensure you're stripped of your inheritance, your shares. We'll ruin your fancy new startup, by warning potential partners of your unpredictability. You'll have nothing. Andrew squared his shoulders, voice firm. I don't need your money. I don't need the hall name. I'll build something of my own, something honest. Caroline's eyes flashed. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving the stunned patrons whispering in her wake. Andrew exhaled a long, shaky breath. He looked at Sophia, who held Ethan tight. The final showdown with his mother had come and gone, and he felt strangely liberated. He had chosen his path, come what may. The hall board vote unfolded exactly as Caroline promised. Andrew was ousted from his family's real estate conglomerate. His shareholdings, once a promising inheritance, were diluted and placed in a family trust he could not access. The media portrayed the split as a tragic downfall, Andrew Hall disinherited after scandal. Yet to Andrew, it felt like a triumphant liberation. He walked away with his head held high, hand in hand with Sophia, with baby Ethan in tow. The Harringtons, unable to prove malicious intent in the failed wedding, eventually dropped their lawsuit, but not without rancor. Elizabeth Harrington vanished from the social scene, rumored to be nursing a wounded pride overseas. The Hall family's empire took a financial hit, leaving Caroline and Charles scrambling to patch their public image, but they refused to reconcile with Andrew, blaming him for all their misfortunes. On the upside, Andrew's new venture attracted a group of socially conscious investors who admired his stand against corporate coercion. They formed a boutique development firm focusing on sustainable communities, bridging green technology with affordable housing solutions, something Andrew and Sophia had often dreamed about when they first met. From a modest office in San Diego, Andrew and Sophia worked side by side. She used her natural warmth and people skills to assist with client relations, while Andrew managed logistics and partnerships. Their hard work bore fruit quickly, with local communities and even some philanthropic funds stepping in to help. The same philanthropic circle that introduced them years ago now saw them as visionaries who walked away from a gilded cage. Their personal life thrived in tandem with their professional endeavors. Ethan grew quickly, a bright-eyed toddler toddling around the office, charming employees and visiting clients alike. Sophia's parents, Carlos and Lucia, often joked that Ethan would grow up to be a chef developer, bridging the restaurant world and real estate in some comedic combination. Though not every day was free of challenges, there were money concerns, the occasional publicity blowback, and Andrew's ongoing grief over losing his extended family. He felt an inner peace he'd never known before. One evening, after a particularly successful client meeting, Andrew and Sophia locked up the office and took Ethan for a walk along the beach. Standing barefoot in the sand as the sun dipped below the horizon, Andrew pulled Sophia close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I'm sorry for all the pain I put you through," he murmured. "But I'm so grateful to have you and Ethan. I wouldn't change a thing." Sophia smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "We have each other, and that's more than enough. This is our real legacy: love, honesty, and a chance to shape our own destiny." And so ends the tumultuous saga of a young mother and a millionaire heir who risked everything to stand by their vows. From secret elopements to dramatic showdowns, public scandals to private heartbreak, Sophia and Andrew discovered that no sum of money or social standing can replace loyalty, love, and family. In the end, they chose a life of authenticity, built upon trust and a willingness to fight for one another, even when powerful forces conspired to tear them apart. If you found yourself cheering for Sophia and Andrew, and if you believe in the transformative power of love over societal expectations, please like this video, share it with friends who appreciate a gripping, true-to-life drama, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that delve into the resilience of the human heart. Your support helps keep these tales of courage and devotion alive. Thank you for watching.